give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? Welcome all of our friends. Thank you for coming back and joining us on Why Do I Give a Fuck? Yep. The podcast.
Good to see
We're
you,
here.
my friend.
Thank you. I'm feeling good. People can see that I'm smiling. I have my tongue back in a way that feels much more comfortable. Yay. It was a good week for me today. I did finally get to go to physiotherapy. Thank you for all the people who are sending prayers and high energy and love and funds. I appreciate all of the support and all of the love. That feels good. That helps in healing. It really, really does. And so yeah, I'm slowly but surely, I'm a month out almost. Yeah, no, a month out. At this point, and I'm doing what folks are saying is miraculously, so I feel really good about that.
I would not.
And I'm glad to be here back in this conversation. Yeah. Thank you.
So glad you're doing better.
So now we can get into it. What are we going to talk about today?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
You know, back when you had your stroke almost a month ago, we were going to be recording about an email blast that went out from an organization that brought you and I together, the organization that we worked together on for a time before we started our podcast. And you and I were talking before we got on as to whether or not we were going to name this organization. You want to share why we decided not to do that, or?
I can. And, just because we haven't reached out to let people know that we're going to be in responsiveness, that what we're going to be talking about is an email that did go out publicly to a very large population of people that support the work, that support the ideas of, peace and anti-war, I guess is the language that they would use is particular. I'm trying to be sensitive to that. And within that, it's really important to be reflective on what your impact is in community when you put things out, and to be able to have a network of folks that are diverse enough to check in with, to help guide you in what you're putting out. So this is an opportunity for us to all learn in a moment on where impacts could be, and maybe some solutions as to reducing the impact that might be intentional. But we all know the whole thing that,
intent less an impact.
Impact. The intention might be one thing, but it does not change what the impact is, even if there, is no specific intention.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about this email.
Yeah, so this email went out. It was, like I said a while ago, just before, I think maybe a week or two before you had your stroke. So about at least a month ago. And it went out to their network, and it was written by former congressman, former presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich. He was a congressman in Ohio, and he ran for president a couple of times. And he is connected to this particular organization as one of the folks who first was the lead sponsor on a bill that this particular organization has been working for over 20 years to try to get implemented, which is to create a cabinet level Department of Peace. So Dennis Kucinich wrote this article, and I don't know if this organization asked him to write it, and I don't know what the origin or the sequence of events was in terms of them deciding to post this article out to their network. But I have to say I had a very visceral and guttural response to it. And my head just went, that the emoji exploding, that was me.
Yeah.
And so what I thought I would do is I thought I would read it first so that we can all listen to it together. I'm also going to put a link to the email, which is really just the article, on the link tree for the Why to Gaff podcast, so that if you want to go back and read it for yourself, because I know sometimes it's easier to actually read it with your own eyes to digest it. But thought I would read it and then we could talk about why I had the reaction that I had, and I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts on it are. So,
Absolutely. And then folks who are watching on YouTube, they can watch my reactions.
yes, yes. And we would love to hear in the
It'll be like a
comments,
little fun.
whatever way that you're consuming this content, we would love to hear what your thoughts on this are. Maybe I'm completely off, but I don't know. It does say at the top that he wrote the article on April 23rd, 2025. So this is his brand new thoughts about the situation in Gaza. So the title was War, Dust, and Collateral Inhalation. Israel breathes in Gaza's dust. Trigger and content warning. A forensic study of the self-inflicted consequences of modern warfare. Gaza is suffering the most intense bombing per capita of anywhere on Earth ever. Over 100,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on Gaza, an area slightly smaller than the city of Detroit, Michigan, resulting in the recorded deaths of at least 60,000 Gazans and injuries to hundreds of thousands. I think that number is well over 100,000 dead, but that's another story. It is impossible to overstate the effects of the abominable bombing war on Gazans, their lives, their families, their health, and their communities. What has escaped attention up until now is the undeniable environmental and health effects of the bombing of Gazans on Israelis, as well as on citizens of neighboring states and the potential harm to U.S. military personnel in the region. A study of explosion physics based on declassified Department of Defense data, as well as blast temperature data and consequent emissions, a review of wind patterns together with publicly available data of health effects from 9/11, as well as data gathered from U.S. veterans of the Persian Gulf War, yield a shocking conclusion. Israel, in executing the unprecedented bombing attack on Gaza, is in effect bombing itself, with grave consequences for the public health of its people. What is being visited upon Gaza does not stay in Gaza.
Mm.
The
Mm.
sustained bombing of Gaza pulverizes stone, heavy metals, and the human body. This is really hard to read, actually. The vaporizing of human beings under extreme heat and pressure combines with dust, water vapor, and metallic particles the size of microns, all blasted upwards, aerosolized, wind driven across borders into Israel and surrounding countries. The unlimited bombing of Gaza has created an unparalleled ecological and biomedical feedback loop. That I agree with. Israel exhales death in Gaza and inhales the Gaza it has vaporized. Israel, in bombing neighboring Gaza, is breathing in its own fallout, along with the vaporized remains of its declared enemies. The external consequences of violence becomes internalized. The substance of the oppressed communes with the oppressor. On a clinical level, breathing in bioaerosols can compromise human immune systems. Breathing in ultra-fine particles from non-biological war dust can cross the blood-brain barrier and contribute to neurodegenerative disease. Israel and the Palestinians share a common atmosphere. They inhale the same war dust from bombs, materials, carbon soot, and the fine particle remains of vaporized Gazans. I just have to say it's really hard to read this because we're acting as if these humans are not humans, and
Mhm.
these are not my words.
Vaporized
Just
remains.
repeat that.
Okay.
These are not my
Mm.
words. Human cremation occurs at temperatures between 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit and 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The blast temperatures of the bombs identified as being dropped on Gaza, Mk-84 bombs, which burn at 4,496 degrees Fahrenheit, GBUs, which burn at 4,892 degrees Fahrenheit, BLUs, which burn at 3,632 degrees Fahrenheit, far exceed this range. In comparison, blast furnaces used to melt steel operate at 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit to 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a pretty sobering paragraph right there.
Yeah, comparison.
People at the epicenter of such bombings in Gaza are instantly turned into dust. This is a factor confounding the determination of exactly how many people have perished in Gaza since October 2023, which is why the numbers are so ridiculously low. How can an accurate body count be achieved if bodies have been turned to smoke and ash? Well, one would wonder, which
Hmm.
one would also might say that's the point of it all. Let's look at 9/11. The total confirmed dead, 2,753. Almost 40% of the victims were never identified as their bodies were fragmented or vaporized, reduced to dust. When a bomb hits its target, for example, a tent city, the high temperature explosion can vaporize a person so thoroughly that microscopic particles of DNA and loose molecules are suspended in air, mingling with dust and smoke as bioaerosols. These biologicals, DNA and fat in human tissue, turn to carbon, black dust, and smoke. The minerals of bones and teeth, skeletal dust, go airborne. Fragments of cells can float in the air. Bubbles holding fat, bone, and broken DNA strands travel with the wind and are breathed in dozens of miles from the blast site. It is not only the superheat that destroys the human body. The explosive force of a bomb in terms of pounds per square inch can produce vaporization at the blast site, an impact equivalent to a plane plunging into the earth at high speed. Again, the visuals. As 100,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on Gaza, the matter destroyed takes a different form as toxic pollutants carried aloft in gas, dust, vapor, and particles. Specifically, toxic quantities of cadmium, nickel, lead, mercury, and arsenic are released into the air, together with dioxins, furans, PCBs, PAHs, and VOCs, which stand for words that nobody knows what they mean. One calculation indicates that 100,000 tons of bombs exploded in a densely populated area of Gaza can generate between 800,000 to 1.2 million tons of pollution. Add to this the dust of Gazans' human remains. He has to keep mentioning that, and you have extreme airborne consequences carried by the wind directly into Israel, particularly the central and northern regions and far beyond. There are relevant comparisons for the health effects of a tremendous explosion in an urban area. A month after 9/11, people in Manhattan began to develop chronic coughs. A longitudinal study of members of the fire department of New York City revealed that after 6 months, firemen began to suffer from chronic bronchitis. Others saw the onset of pulmonary fibrosis. 2 years after 9/11, a higher incident of thyroid, prostate, breast, and other cancers arose among those exposed to 9/11 contaminants. Early onset neurodegenerative Alzheimer's type symptoms presented after 5 years or longer. Based on epidemiological data from studies of those near the people and buildings destroyed on 9/11, certain health effects can be anticipated in Israel. The people of, I'm not gonna say these names right, I'm gonna try. The people of Sterdot, Netivot, Beersheba, all within a short distance of Gaza, are at high risk of long-term health effects of the bombing. Ashkelon and Tel Aviv have been exposed to environmental consequences, as has northern Israel and even Jordan. While Israel's Ministry of Environmental Protection operates air monitoring stations at sites proximate to Gaza, it would be instructive, given the intensity of the bombing, to see if the effects of war-related pollution are being fully disclosed to the Israeli public. Given the unprecedented levels of bombing in Gaza, the types of bombs used, their explosive power, the extent of physical destruction, the extraordinary number of casualties, the creation of large plumes of black smoke containing the genetic material of burned and vaporized Gazans, the people of Israel on the other side of the Gaza boundary will likely experience increased levels of respiratory illness, asthma-like and other pulmonary diseases, and a sharp increase in cancer as a direct result of being exposed to toxic airborne substances present at a microscopic level while they commit genocide. Added to this direct hazard is the ongoing recirculation of wind across the vast hellscape to which Gaza has been reduced. That too will sweep up and redistribute the contaminants from the over 50 million tons of debris from the land of Gaza to the land of Israel. No speaking of Palestine. At this point, the calamity which has befallen Gaza as a result of incessant bombing will visit, in various forms and degrees of harm, southern and central Israel, western Jordan, the northeast Sinai Peninsula, northern Egypt, Delta, and Cairo, Lebanon, Cyprus, southwestern Syria, northwestern Saudi Arabia, southeastern Turkey, Crete, Greece, Sicily, and Malta. Additionally, sea spray can carry aerosolized particles clear across the Mediterranean Sea. The United States has a substantial number of naval forces in the eastern Mediterranean, including 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the USS Gerald R. Ford, as well as numerous other assault ships. U.S. military installations are present at Incirlik, Turkey, Naples, Italy, Cyprus, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. All face war dust pollution hazards as a result of the bombing of Gaza. I know well the adverse health consequences suffered by U.S. servicemen and women who served in the Persian Gulf between 1990 and 1991. Veterans of that war came to my congressional office complaining of constant pain, neurological, musculoskeletal, gastrointestinal, and respiratory symptoms, all of which were ignored or covered up by the Department of Defense. As a member of Congress, over the objections of the Department of Defense, I took up the cause of veterans who suffered what came to be known as Gulf War illness, a multi-symptom condition still affecting to this very day nearly 245,000 veterans of the Persian Gulf War. Bernie Sanders and I worked together in Congress to obtain funding for research into GWI, which is now a medically recognized war-related condition. Here's the conclusion. Oh no, we're not to the conclusion yet, but we're close. When you see the measurable, catastrophic effect which war environments can have on those who serve, and the measurable, catastrophic effect on those proximate to the 9/11 attacks, and the indefensible obliteration bombing of Gaza and its people, you may come to an understanding of the wholly fallacious notion of the containment of war and why I assert Israel is bombing itself. The bombing of Gaza has created a human health crisis which cannot be ignored any longer. There must be an immediate ceasefire on humanitarian and ecological basis. Well, at least he said that. The UN must urgently address the collapse of the Palestinian public health system, including the implications of the war for respiratory diseases and cancer among survivors. That's if they cared if there were survivors. The UN must lead a transboundary environmental and human health assessment of the immediate and long-term implications of war dust, which will include transboundary assessments of the toxic environmental effects of the war. Monitoring stations must be set up. The people of the world have a right to know what is in the air they breathe. International humanitarian environmental law must at last be enforced. UN representatives must determine a path forward. Israel and the United States must consider the far-reaching consequences of the decision to attack and bomb the people of another country. The tortured mindset which licenses the extinction of Gazans is now a specter haunting the entire world with its ghoulish designs on Iran. I will explore that approaching cataclysm in a future column. Human rights and compassion are not considerations in bombing Gazans. Perhaps enlightened self-preservation can be introduced as a means to stop the bombing once and for all. The war against Gazans must end, and perhaps through the suffering of Gazans and understanding the regional and global health impact of bombing, we may understand why it is time to call an end to all wars.
I think it's okay to take a pause just after reading that for a moment, even for our listeners to just
I'm shaking.
inhale that. Inhale that. Yeah. Definitely a difficult read on so many levels. On so many levels.
So many levels.
So the first thing that I heard, and I want to kind of start at the end, where there is this acknowledgement that the humanitarian component is clearly something that people aren't looking at. So I am hearing that this person has decided to try to invoke some emotion if you're thinking about how it impacts you.
Yeah.
The impact of on you yourself maybe might help to motivate you to want to act differently is what I'm believing I understand is what I'm believing I understand, and that's me reaching to try to have an understanding. So let's be clear
Yeah.
about that because it's so ridiculous is the word I want to it's so ridiculous to not. And I understand, I'm hearing that things can fall on deaf ears. I'm hearing that part of, hey, world, recognize that it's deaf ears that an entire group of humans, I'm not even going to name them for what their religious beliefs are and all of that kind of stuff. An entire group of humans are being wiped off the earth.
Yes.
That's first and foremost. Like, we're sitting with the reality that humans are getting wiped off the earth as purposeless beings.
Intentionally.
And yeah, intentionally.
Really.
Intentionally.
Well,
And right, the other part of this is that what a wonderful, science giving us all the science of what bombs do, because I honestly didn't know that. And for us as people, US born or still considered US citizens or whomever or however, we are literally funding and paying for this level of annihilation of a whole entire community of humans.
yeah.
So civilization, not just community, because community is so small, but an entire demographic of humans
Millions
in the
of
world.
humans. Yes. Yes.
So,
For a
so,
land
so
grab.
after you read this, tell me some of what your reactions and responses to this were. Like after you, well, I mean, and reading it again, it invokes the same.
Yeah. 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 So when it first came across my inbox and I read it, I was as incensed as I am now at the tone deafness of it. I mean, just reading it out loud, because I only read it to myself. This is the first time I've read it out loud. And reading it
Mhm.
out loud and the academia lens with which it's written through is tone deaf because
Yes.
we're talking about the destruction of human beings, children. A lot of these are children.
Hmm.
Hundreds of thousands of these are children, maybe millions, and you're reducing them to dust and particles and
Articles.
microns
Hmm.
and and the framing of how it's impacting Israelis is, while I understand that that's a truth, right? I mean, on the environmental scale, what is happening, what has been happening for 600 days now, we just hit
Hmm.
600 days a couple of days ago, is impacting all of the humans across the globe, and the occupied people of Israel, the occupiers that are right next door, of course, are going to be, besides the people who are being annihilated, are going to be the most directly affected because of the proximity. But the academic lens by which this was written to me is so classic whiteness. It's not even, and I, I know sometimes people get frustrated with me because I reduce everything to whiteness, and I,
I mean, that's the world we live in. That's the
it is the
reality.
world we live
So,
in.
yeah.
And that's the first thing that was ringing through my brain when I was first reading this as it came across my inbox. What the hell? This is so classic of this particular organization that we used to work for and other organizations like it that believe that they are in the purposefulness of making the world a better place for everyone, and yet what they see through their lens is so narrow and so focused. It's like to write a whole article with all of these. I mean, there are lots of little footnote. No, he did lots of research on this to write this article. For what? To appeal to people that we shouldn't be annihilating an entire group of people for a land grab? I mean, at the end, he says that
You're saying you're not supposed to annihilate a whole group of people for your own health.
because it's going to hurt your health.
Because
Because it's
you're
going
gonna
to, yeah,
then, as you're
I'm worried
annihilating them,
about the Israelis.
you're gonna be inhaling their flesh and bones. Like
Yeah.
that's
So don't do
it's
it.
yeah.
So don't do it. I mean, he did mention a couple of times in here that the war should stop. but he was very clear in his academic assessment that the war should stop because people are breathing in the dust and the microns
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
humans that they're annihilating. It just
Mhm.
blows my mind. And
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about this on here because this is one of the things I give a fuck about. And this is one of the
Yes.
things that I
My career.
left this organization because I could not get through the very, very, very thick whiteness lens of, oh, but we're trying to make the world a more peaceful place.
Mhm.
I didn't mean to, I would imagine if I confronted Dennis tomorrow about this, he would say, well, I didn't mean to, I was just trying. And as you were saying, intent does not lessen impact. And
Right. That is it.
I can only imagine if there were anybody in the network of this organization that got this email that have family members in Gaza, that have, Palestinian roots, that have friends here in the US territory, that maybe have family over in Gaza. Just reading the words description describing the pulverization of their human loved ones. I mean, I reading it out loud just it turns my stomach. I can't even, and I understand probably what he told himself, why he needed to write this, because we need to appeal, as you were saying, we need to try to get people to hear it. And maybe they'll hear it if we put it in this academic measure. But I, he, you missed the mark, Dennis.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Let's talk about that. So, if we're coming from Western civilization's value spaces, right?
Hmm.
The email does do the classic. Now I'm going to be a little bit academic if I can.
Yeah.
I'm using notes to do it because I also have my brain. But I remember, working with my young people when it's time to write papers, right? And so it's like, okay, let's appeal to the ethos, the pathos, and the legos. You did all that. You got all that.
Yeah.
Ching ching, great. You're doing that. And like to bring people back, again, use my notes. So like when you're talking about ethos, you're like building the credibility of
Mm.
the person who's doing the writing to say, I even am the person who can say this. And so I'm David Kucinich. I'm a congressperson. I had people come into my office and talk about the impacts of 9/11 bombing, that a lot of US citizens had a huge impact. It's continued impact. Public health issues, mental, social, environmental issues, all of those things. So, all right, giving yourself credibility to even say that. Then the pathos part of it, that would could offer some more improvement, because pathos that is valued for me is recognizing and stating more about the Gazans who are the humans that are being annihilated, and actually naming that, naming, okay, I'm going to talk about this thing, but we are recognizing that as I'm talking about this, we are talking about human people that deserve their life. No war, no bombing or anything like that for public health issues, but no bombing and no war because we don't want to be killing people. So I'm just going to help bring that along if folks have missed that in the reading. We don't want war because there is no need for us to be bombing and killing people, a
Right.
majority of women and children, but even men, doctors,
Anybody.
sisters,
Yeah.
mothers, grandmothers. Like, we are killing people, and we're killing people for what? Because I still haven't gotten the what. Like, what is the, like, and there is no what, because that's why we haven't gotten
Except that it's a land grab.
the what.
Israel wants to finish the occupation of the entire land that they stole. So,
Yeah.
he was very careful to stay away from that.
To
Very
say,
careful to stay away from that. Which,
and which is what happens when we are annihilating people, right? You want some resource that the people then become, you're more about profit over people, and people become completely and totally insignificant.
yeah,
And then if we're going to look at the Legos, that is what is even more unfortunate about the impact of this, because like I said, I do appreciate having a very thorough explanation of what bombs do. But as you're having the conversation, the language, the diction that you're choosing completely, it does not, has no regard for human life. Because then when you start talking about
dehumanizing.
particles, when you start talking about dust, when you start talking, you're not talking about John, Sarah.
Yeah.
It's John, Sarah. These are not the names of the
No,
folks
no.
from Palestine. I'm so sorry. I'm using names that I know, but you're not talking about this. This is these are humans. You've reduced them into something that's not human, so it's easier to ingest what it
Right.
is that we're talking about because you switch the focus. You switch the focus of what we should be actually caring about.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
dehumanizing.
and so that's what
It's
it's
dehumanizing.
totally dehumanizing
Yeah, that
and
all of the
invalidating.
academic lens that this article was written through, it completely dehumanizes the people that are being annihilated. And I think intentionally, I mean, I think it shows the author's allegiance to Israel to stay away
Mm,
from the hot button
naming.
of naming what's actually happening. Yes, he talks about it being a war. It's not a war. It's a Holocaust.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, it's not Israel and
And it's
Palestine
a Holocaust in the
neighboring
same way that we
countries.
understand. ho- I'm sorry. It's a Holocaust in the same way that we understand Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
Melting bodies,
Yes.
like something that folks have experienced. Those who are now advancing the oppression on people have experienced in the history of their experience,
And the
melting bodies,
intentionality and the
you know?
intentionality behind that speaks
Hmm.
to Holocaust. The intent,
Hmm.
and I've
Absolutely.
been listening to people smarter than me talking about we were calling it a genocide, but actually we need to shift and start calling it a Holocaust because there's intentionality behind everything that's happening. I mean, when Dennis mentions that Israel and Gaza are neighboring countries, that's not true.
Yeah.
Palestine is occupied by the
Right.
Israelis. And so
Hmm.
so his intentionality around subverting all of that information to me speaks largely to what his lens is and where it comes from. And it just and all the talk about 9/11, I understand the correlation between what happened in 9/11 and what because he's speaking to a largely US audience, and
Operation.
so he's using something that
Hmm.
they can connect to and understand. I get that, but I'm thinking how many people are reading this email that had loved ones that they lost in 9/11 and are listening to their loved ones being
Loved
removed?
ones.
He's dehumanizing the people that died in 9/11 just as much as he's dehumanizing what's happening
Yes.
to the Gazans. And so my heart goes out to the people reading this that were, actually that lost loved ones in 9/11 because that impact is real too. It just yeah. So
And then also there's a thing that we experience in our social culture when we're not naming the actual thing,
yeah.
right?
Yes.
Um, and because this email and the way that it was distributed um, doesn't specifically offer the audience that it was intended for.
Mm.
Um, and there is something that if you name, hey, I'm writing this thing and I am writing it to this specific audience in this way because I am recognizing that this audience is not understand or not is not moved by the human violence that is
Right.
occurring, so that then those who are not a part of that audience, can help contextualize and understand maybe a little bit more clearly why it's necessary to write it this way, because you're not gonna reach the pathos of folks on just humanity. But you got to name that. You got to name and say that also as a part of the solution to create the healing and to actually get folks to want to be open to understanding what your point is. And I'm saying this to offer a, an understanding and also offer an excuse. And I don't want to do that because I'm not sure if that's what the intention in the space is. I am communicating that there is a more effective way of sharing information or offering a point that is less harmful to folks that you can
Yes.
be in consideration of, right? Because it's like, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and whomever else is hearing it, but I'm actually talking to my child because I'm disciplining you on something,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like people know that that is the direct direction and they can have whatever responsiveness to it, but hey, I wasn't dealing with I and I'm making an excuse to try to make it make sense. And I'm recognizing I'm doing that as I'm having this conversation because it doesn't make sense, which is the bottom line. There is a public health issue with bombing humans, and
Yes,
that is bombing humans. There's
period.
a public health issue with bombing, killing, holocausting, annihilating, and that is it. And that has to be stated first and foremost, not the public health issues about what you're inhaling and what the degrees that you have to melt a body and all of this kind of stuff, or what wind will blow things across the water. No, the public health issue with Holocaust, annihilating, genocide is exactly that. And that has to be named first, foremost. It has to be stated. Because when you don't do that, you do invalidate the credibility of what your writing is, and you invalidate the credibility or positionality, to your point, and where your allegiances are. And so you're trying to effectuate some type of change. You're not. You're not.
Yeah, I just went back and looked, and I don't think I haven't done a search, but I don't think he mentions, he never calls them Palestinians. He calls them Gazans.
Gazans.
And Gaza's not a country for
Hmm.
those listening.
To
Um,
be Gazans. Hmm.
Gazans it's the
You
country
could say the
of
people who live in Gaza.
he
Well,
could have said the
even if you
people.
don't, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Hmm.
But he, he calls them Gazans. It's all Gazans. It's
Hmm.
this is what's happening in Gaza and neighboring Israel. And so to me, it's like that's the first part of the dehumanization, is to not even name them
Yep.
Palestinians, not even name the country that they're actually from. So yeah, so for anybody, the biggest reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think this is a perfect example of something that an organization or a group of folks can feel like they're putting out and really feel like they're doing something, like they're saying something valid to get this Holocaust to end. And it's absolutely misses the mark by, in my opinion, by so much. And so that's largely why I wanted to talk about this out loud, because I wanted to say to anyone who might have gotten this email and read it and thought, I never thought of it that way before. Maybe I do agree with a ceasefire. To please examine, if you're listening to the sound of my voice, why you thought this was an in any way an actual meaningful argument for stopping a Holocaust. And if that's the first time you've considered that this might be a good reason to do so, look at yourself in the mirror, because this ain't it. And that's part of why I left this organization, because I can't just keep putting my head on the pillow and saying, oh, I'm working for peace, when I know I'm actually not doing a damn thing to help anything and to create any meaningful peace for anybody that doesn't look like me. So
Hmm.
I appreciate you going through that with me. I know we've gone a little over time. There's still a lot more that we can
There's
say.
there's so much to say, but I
Woo.
did want to offer also this as a consideration as well, as
Okay.
folks are thinking about this, because as I'm listening to this, I'm also recognizing what my experience in something like this is, and that really speaks to capitalism. What I was speaking to previously on this recording, which is when profitability is becomes more important than actual people.
Yeah.
And when you have that experience, there is a lot of it within capitalism and individualistic reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm getting my words together, y'all. Bear with me, but
That was great.
individualism, where you turn in and say, this horrible, terrible thing is happening, and I see it's happening, and I can run a blind eye. But if it's affecting me, then I might want to do something.
Yeah.
And we have to come out of that type of individualistic being
Yes.
and presence of being, where you're only going to change if something is if you believe that something is directly impacting you.
Mm-hmm.
That we cannot live in a world like that. We have to start thinking collectively about how to care. And I say this, I sound like a broken record. I think I might say this on every single podcast. What is it going to
It
take
bears
for us to
repeating,
start,
so go
you know,
for it.
right? Because there is like in capitalism, in white heteropatriarchy, in like the hierarchies that we live in, it does take us to this very individualistic thing. We cannot exist
Yeah,
without each other. We
right.
cannot exist without thinking collectively about how it is that our ecosystems connect. And this, in a warped way, I know that there was that I heard how there was trying to make a connection. There even was a sentence where it's weird to repeat, where it was saying, the Israelis and the Palestinians are intertwined with each other, and they're intertwined because gusts of body parts are going in and being inhaled. That's not what we're talking about, but that's what the letter was saying, the
Yeah.
email was saying. And we are intertwined in an ecosystem with each other. And anything that one of us does, it is a wave of impact to the rest of us. And that is what I experience in capitalism, in whiteness, that there is always that disconnect of recognizing that we are a ecosystem of collective attachment together. Whether or not you like it, whether or not you support it, something happens here, there is a ripple someplace else. And that is the central point that we need to be reminded and focused on, and reflecting before we put things out. Are we checking in with the ecosystem of care and connection that we have as as humans? And if we're not, then we should like hold back for a second and check in with the larger network
Yeah.
before we put it out. And that's the offering
Yeah.
that I would.
Yes. Did he run this article past any Palestinians before he put it out there? I doubt,
Mhm.
I doubt it. So, and I do want to correct, he does mention in one of the paragraphs, he says Israel and Palestinians share a common atmosphere. I think that's the
Thank you for
only
that
time he
correction.
mentioned that they were Palestinians.
Mhm.
The rest of the time it was all Gazans. But anyway. Well, this has been a long conversation, so thank you for sticking with
Appreciate
us,
it.
those of you who are
Yeah, man.
still listening and watching. And I will put this article in our link tree. So if you want to read it for yourself, it will be there for you to be able to read and digest. And if you want to, I don't imagine anybody wanting to. I don't want to read it again. I promise you that.
I understand. Yeah, no, that's true. And we don't want to have to read things like this. We want to get to a place where
Yeah.
we,
We got to do this better. Yeah.
love each other and care for each other in different ways.
Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks
I
for joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard?
continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Deanne. Music by Norwegian musician Water.
much?
See you next time.
Why do I